And
Yeah.
then there's another question of what happens to that energy then, and that's a whole other discussion.
I don't know the answer. I think I know, but that'll be interesting when I die. I'll come back and haunt people and let them know.
Well,
Interesting.
then we're moving into quantum physics and
Right.
time and all that.
All right, Keith, welcome back to the show. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. For the folks that are listening in, I just want to let you know that Keith and I have had a conversation before. He invited me onto his podcast last May, I think, in preparation for the Psychedelic Sciences Conference that was in Denver in June. And we had a great conversation about many things, but and we can link to that episode if anybody's interested, so you can listen in on his show, which is called The Mindfulness Experience again. Keith, welcome.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me here. I'm very excited to talk to you. It's so interesting to have the tables turned and to be in the seat of vulnerability versus being the questioner. I'm the one being questioned. So I hope you'll be kind and as you always are. And I look forward to sharing and hopefully caring and maybe dropping some seeds along the way for some folks that might take root and blossom.
All right. I really want to dig into your book because just as some background, Keith gave me an advance copy that I read, and it took me a while to respond because as I read it, so much of it hit home that it was, as I was reading it, I was like, oh my God, I feel like this book is about me in a lot of ways. We have different experiences, but we have taken those different experiences and I think arrived in a really similar place. So give us a little bit. Your letters are interesting. You're a master in divination. You've got the PAT, psychedelic assisted therapy, and author. Tell us a little bit about what it is that you do now, and then we can get a little bit into your background and how you got there.
Sure. Well, thank you for asking the question. Yeah, I've got those letters, but I'm really a contemplative therapist, really working with people to help them go deep and use mindfulness and breathing and help them to self-regulate their autonomic nervous system. Because that really is, when we look at breath, I look at the idea that breath is the Latin word for breath, I have that in the book, but the Latin word is spiritus. So it really is spirit. It really is the root word for inspiration, for spirit, for aspiration, for perspiration. So we really sweat our prayers. We really bring those things that we aspire into the world. So it's also used to in the book as the idea of a spiral. So in time, we were able to, in my work, we're able to use the breath as a self-regulating tool to go back to memories, and in those memories, help us to reframe, to reboot, reset, reframe trauma, and give words to it. So the work I do is really around narrative therapy in a big way. We use contemplation, narrative, because if you can tell your story, then once you can tell your story, you can change it. And it's so important because so many people get hung up on what happened to them and when it happened and so on and so forth, but they don't really go into it in detail to really help them to reframe it, to reboot it, to reframe it. And so the work that I do is contemplative. It's also, I have psychedelic in there as well. I'm a trained psychedelic assisted therapy provider with Integrative Psychiatry Institute. And I use psycholytic dosing, so very small dosing to help calm the default mode network, the amygdala, the fight or flight or freeze or fawn portion that really stops us and protects us from those traumatic memories. So in using those tools and using those psychedelics, and it can be in New York, it's primarily low dose ketamine or low dose cannabis. So using those tools really allow then the opening up of and the more dialogue into the who, the what, the where, the when, the how, the why, and then we can, do that. And that's the work that I've done in the book.
Think one of the things I love about modern, we'll call it talk therapy, is where it's going and the tools that it's using. I've talked a little bit about my foray into talk therapy, who is interesting. He's a former Army guy, very traditional, and so he took a very Freudian approach, which I think in the end didn't really work for me. But we did some good work together. It was a good foundation for going and doing the other things. But I love that you're bringing other tools into your work that and completely opening up the possibilities of talk therapy, not as something that you do like forever, but something there's an end where somebody like you give somebody a springboard and then they go off and then you don't see them anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I always say I like to say that, talk therapy is a little like showing up and throwing up, and then you leave. You know, and you don't necessarily get you don't get any homework assignment, you don't get any specific, you feel okay for a little while, but then you go, what was that? Oh, kind of yucky, and I'm not sure what to do with all this. And then you kind of wonder, okay, am I normal? So there's doesn't seem to be a lot of process around normalization or giving me the tools to scaffold or to really self-manage or self-regulate. So, the work that I do, it's much more Jungian and much more like there is that aspect of, talk. What is my self-talk? So there's CBT and, cognitive distortions, but there's a lot of DBT in terms of really where am I now, or even more so ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, which really moves toward some kind of behavior versus moving away from the things that really we need to deal with. So we want to move towards being whole and complete, being authentic, being compassionate, being curious, being caring, all of the things that really move us into a state of courageousness, a state of, you know I'm a good person. I've tried and I've gotten through the storm, and yeah, I've gotten some scars along the way, but I'm resilient, and I can come back and I can go into the dark and I can be there and I can, walk through towards the light. So, those are kinds of things that I think are, they really require, I think, a deep sense of presence and a deep sense of caring and compassion to be with that individual in that moment, to really say, I get you, I feel you, I get you, and it's okay. And why don't we look at that and the who, the what, the where, the why, the when, the when, the why, and why don't we frame that in a way that you can come back to that as an adult and care for that part of yourself that maybe was too vulnerable or too that really didn't get the care, the kindness, the compassion that needed, and you had to toughen up and you had to do things that you didn't want to, perhaps, but you needed to in order to feel like you were loved and cared for, or in order to feel like you were seen.
Well, there is a lot in that we could unpack. Let's start with one of the things that I'm doing right now is a class called Positive Intelligence. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's reframing the things that we do to sabotage ourselves as our overused skills. For example, a gift of organization can be controlling, and controlling is something that you can sabotage yourself with. I love reframing the things that we did as young children that are no longer serving us as strengths, and how to mold those, or reframe them, or modify them to create strengths instead of the things that are holding us back.
Yeah, yeah, And that's so true. For me, when I wrote the book, one of the things that happened to me was I've spent a lifetime of really in high protector mode, very organized, got very I was in the military and military intelligence and dealt with top secret. I had a top secret clearance and really did encoded messaging, encryption as a part of the ballistic missile defense communications activity. And, learned how to be very stoic and learned how to bottle things up and be very organized. And that to me was a real protector. It was a real way for me to protect my vulnerability, because if I was buttoned up, if I was right on it, then no one could say anything to me and I could feel safe. Within the book, I wrote the book right after an open heart surgery. This is 18 months ago. I had sort of accumulated a lot of diary work, a lot of self, what happened, the who, the what, the where, the when. And when I went into the hospital, I was very vulnerable. And I spell vulnerability with two V's, and the two V's are for Willie. And Willie is my younger self. My name's Keith William Fiveson, and Willie is the vulnerable, the more vulnerable part of myself that is an energy that I recollected during those moments. I recollected things that came up, protective elements, ways that that were firefighting, things that happen in my life, drinking, drugging, eating, sexing, spending, all of these things that, really were protective elements to uh, numb me or calm this fury and this pain and this upset. So, when I began the book, I really stayed with that, because it's really about, healing really, I think, happens when our older self goes back to the child self and says, it was okay. You're okay. You've made it. And, you don't have to worry anymore. And, here's what happened. And, I'm with you. And, you bring those parts back to journey home, if you will, to be a whole individual from trauma to wholeness. So.
You bring a lot of parts work into the book. For those who aren't familiar, internal family systems is a way to break down different parts of our personality into ways that we can work with them as individuals, so to speak. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you use that in your work and what the different parts might be?
Well, the book is Return of the Exiled Child. So, and it sort of goes through five pathways, but the primary pathway that I think many people get stuck with is their map of their exile, their own exile. Where were they exiled? And that exile can happen with shame or fear or anxiety or panic or overwhelm. It's the part of us that really feels isolated. And in my case, in the case of Willie, the book opens up with a story of Willie hiding in the closet at 3 years old, and hearing the fighting and the screaming going on outside, and then it moves into the story more specifically as it starts to emerge of a true self, and this was the self that is in the book that's noted as Mr. Moto, and that part of myself which really is the side of yourself that's the seer, and it's the side of yourself that says, shh, it's okay, you're going to be okay, everything's fine. So it's that courageous side, that curious side, that calm side that really says, shh, take it easy, you're going to be okay, that's clear, that's confident, that, really looks at being connected, that, we're going to get through this. It's that real authentic side that says, okay, we've got this. And then, if you don't get there, and there are still those exiles, which are shame and fear, uncertainty, and that spinning, it feels like a spiraling out of control in a lot of cases. There are the managers that step in, right? And the managers that step in are what we're talking about. We're talking about, the people pleaser, the doubter, the controller, the perfectionist, the individual that is, I go there with intellectualizing a lot. I can intellectualize something and, cut off my head from my heart. And I love the saying, the longest trip we make in life is the trip between our head and our heart. you know so it's that part of us that really overmanages. And then, if that's not working really well, then there's the firefighters. And the firefighters, oh boy, those are, the numbers. And the numbers are the drinking, eating, sexing, spending, addiction, the compulsive behaviors, the rage, the blame shifting. It wasn't, I'm not responsible. They are. They're the problem. It's not me. So there's those things, and that can really start to spiral to be suicidal. It can be, in a lot of cases, deeply depressing, self harm, disassociation, all of those things. So those areas they're not dysfunctions per se. What they are is they're ways of coping. And there's different degrees of coping that individuals have, just as I believe that, you know, um, we better living through chemistry in a lot of cases. If people are more aware of their own body chemistry, even breathing, deep breathing, 4-7-8 count breathing is a beautiful way to hack into your autonomic nervous system, and just start to regulate yourself, so you have more oxygen, then you have more breathing. So there's ways of hacking into the system that allow us to get back to our authentic self, and allow us to just be present in the moment without spiraling back or spiraling forward, because many people live their lives looking in the rear view mirror, or having anxiety about where they're going, and aren't present for the ride. So, that's the hope that comes from the book, is that everyone can see themselves in the book through the archetypes and the stories that I tell.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that resonated with me the most was the section that you talked about, using food as a weapon, and how, because food is socially acceptable, in a lot of ways, we like to judge people, if we see that their body type doesn't fit what we think, if they're bigger body types or whatever. But in reality, food and exercise, at least for me, were ways of coping. And I think they were big for you. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Well, I was a fat kid. I was a fat kid because I found some solace in food. And my mother and father were divorced when I was a kid. So, within the book, the energy that little Willie is, a fat kid. And um, dad is really a restrictor, and mom is a pleaser. She wants to go ahead and make sure he eats enough, and he feels, because food is love, and for so many people. But yet, at the same point, being a restrictor is really about being disciplined and not eating. So, within the book, the story with Willie, the story is dad says things like, "You eat like you had two assholes," or "I'd rather clothe you than feed you." So those are shame bound feelings, right? And the shame starts the spiral. And the only way you can deal with shame is to start feeling better, And, within the context of that, food is a wonderful relief for that. So while dad provides the shame, mom provides the relief, which says, here, have some more food. What would you like? If you learn how to cook, you'll never go hungry. And, as a young man, I was a short order cook. I learned how to cook. I love eating. I still love eating, but, it's a different relationship. And one of the things that I find is that, Gabor Mate talks about the hungry ghost. He has a book um, specifically around this Buddhist term, the hungry ghost, which is really around the idea that there's a big belly and a small mouth. So the mouth can't really talk that much, but it's open enough to eat, and it really can't get its fill. It's it continues to eat. So we find that so many people are hungry ghosts. They don't they're helpless, hopeless, hapless, and hungry for and starved for attention, for recognition, to be heard, to be seen, to be recognized. And that's the case with so many of us in these families where there are latchkey kids or divorced parents, or society which is just not looked at ways of really raising kids in a family environment or in a community where they're really imprinted with the right imprints. So we look at that within the book. Within the one chapter, we dive very deep into the food area, and we start to take a look at ways that really we can manage that better. So there's the stories. The stories lead to the teachings. The teachings lead to the practices and the reflections. So, each of the chapters goes into a different set of stories, a different set of teachings, a practice and reflection. And then, of course, there's some of workbook there, and there's an extension to that, to the book, which is a workbook, and some additional stuff.
One of the things I love about you, Keith, is that I think there's a healthy dose of spirituality. The last time we chatted, we talked a lot about Taoism. And one of the reasons I love Taoism is because it gives me a language to talk about something that's completely missing from what I would call Western rationalism. And while we do have Christianity, I think in a lot of ways the mysticism and the deeper spirituality is missing from that paradigm. Can you tell us a little bit more about? And you've got the Master of Divination in your background. How do you bring that in a way that resonates with people that come to talk to you?
Well, thanks for asking the question, because I'm what might call, what people might call with a little bit of humor, a cashew. So my mother was Catholic, my father is Jewish. And in the Catholic religion, you're the religion of the father. In the Jewish religion, you're the religion of the mother. So that would make me a lot of nothing. Within the context of that, I always searched for really understanding, what is this thing? What is this thing called religion? What is this thing called spirituality? And I do believe that all of the religions are like boats on the ocean. And, some of them are big cruise ships, some of them are little dinghies, but they're all on the same ocean. And, the ocean and the water is a wonderful analogy for flow. It's a wonderful analogy for Taoism, because we're all made of water, and we're all composed of energy, and we're signals. And if we understand sound, we understand the vibrational attunement to that. We understand the energetic forces of both light and dark, of opposites, and the opposites don't exist without each other. So, I love Taoism for that reason, because it doesn't ask us to pick the light or the dark. What it does is it says to us, how do we accept the darkness, yet move into the light? And how do we move through the darkness, or accept the light, and then at the same point accept the darkness. So you see that Taoist symbol, the yin yang. The yin is the dark one with a little spot of white, and the yang is the light one with a little spot of dark. And it's a continual flow, and energy is that way. I truly don't believe we're nouns. I believe we're verbs. We're verbs having a spirits having a human experience, right? We're all involved in this continual experience of life, continuing to flow from birth to death. And it's that cycle that I really do believe that we're looking to come to grips with, which is that spiral, as much of the spiral of where we've been and where we are and where we're then. That's normally the heavier, wider part of the spiral, to the spiral that goes up towards where we're going. And, it's only when we stop breathing that the spiral stops. And
Yeah.
then there's another question of what happens to that energy then. And that's a whole other discussion.
I don't know the answer. I think I know, but, that'll be interesting when I die. I'll come back and haunt people and let them know.
Well,
Interesting,
then we're moving into quantum physics and
right?
time and all that.
I I hope we get there as a human race, at least in the Western culture, where we recognize that there is this whole quantum thing and that it's just as important as the hard rationalism. One of the interesting things about the yin yang symbol is, we there is the light, which is the yang, and then there's the dark, which is the yin. But in that context, darkness isn't badness. It's just a different part of the spectrum, and that the yin is all about nourishment and, loosely translated, you could say it's the feminine as well, but that's not actually darkness. It's just a different part of the experience. And I think if we were to open up to the idea that we didn't necessarily need to embrace our darkness, we just need to embrace the nurturing side along with the active side, the connective side along with the doing side, that we might be a little bit more in balance.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for reframing that. Yeah, because it really is compassion and kindness and curiosity that really exist very much so in that unknowing, in that softness, in that area of I don't know, and it's okay that I don't know. And so many people just want to know, and they think they know, and they don't, and that's ignorance, and that breeds aversion, and it also breeds arrogance, and it's not good. So getting in touch with that softness, that soft pillow, that kindness, that compassionate heart, really is, I think, very key. And it's even more key now for masculinity, I think, more than at any point ever, that we as men really start to breathe a little bit more, start to listen a little bit more, start to be more compassionate, more caring about our own humanity. And that's really where I think that exists to a large extent. You can be a strong, vulnerable man without having to be somehow aggressive or abusive or any of those things, which it's not strength. What it is it's it's darkness confused as strength. It's when I say darkness, it's the fear or the aversion of darkness that gets wrapped up and says, I don't want to know, or I will not know, and then gets wrapped up into anger or confusion in some way, and starts to make judgments that are just horrible. So
I would love to know where kindness became a weakness in our society along the way. That's one of the things that I ponder on pretty much on the daily. I don't watch news hardly ever, but when I do, it's like, where did we decide that kindness was a liability?
I do want to say that I think that there are a lot of people that are kind, but kindness doesn't mean softness. It doesn't necessarily mean it means that you're able to face the truth with a compassionate perseverance and a compassionate integrity that says, this is wrong. This isn't the way we treat people. This isn't the way you should treat people, and you need to stop. That is also kindness. Kindness is not stupid kindness. And in a lot of cases, it really does require discipline. Kindness requires discipline. And many people get confused, I think, that somehow to be kind is to be soft and pliable and just a pushover, a snowflake. Whereas kindness really is, no, that doesn't work. That's not acceptable. And to be able to call out to be able to go in, and even with the relationships that you were born with, to be able to go in and to say, that was not acceptable. And you don't do that. And what was your issue at that point? And then you start digging into really understanding. And then there is another act of kindness, which is, um, you did the best you could given the fact that you were abused. And I suffered from it. But look, I'm now going back and looking at that, and that's not acceptable. But I can care for myself now, and I can also make sure that that never happens again to me or to anyone else that's, in my life. So I think, there's a lot of a question around that. And from a societal viewpoint, the imprints or the examples are not good right now, unfortunately.
Yeah. If we don't even know how to be kind to ourselves, I think it's hard to be kind to other people. I mean, really what we're talking about isn't necessarily kindness, it's more along the lines of compassion, I think. And the idea of a curiosity. When I was teaching midshipmen at the Naval Academy, they would ask me from time to time, "What do you think the most important quality of a leader is?" And at the time, I said humility. But I think now I would change that ever so slightly to, and this applies to our current political state, and it could apply to healthcare too, because that's really what this podcast is about, is that overlap between conventional, which I think lacks a little bit of compassion, and and the alternative. So without curiosity, that we can't do any of that. And curiosity implies humility. Like if I'm curious, I already know that I don't know everything, and I think that's part of what's missing from healthcare, from mental health care, and from what's going on in our society at large.
Mm. Hmm. Here, here. Absolutely. Yeah.
You talked about, and I had a previous guest on. His name was Gary Hess, and if anybody wants to listen to that episode, we can post a link for how to get there. Gary Hess is in Louisiana. He's a veteran and he's working with cannabis. Um, and interestingly, we still look at cannabis as if it's this thing that only dope heads do, which is really, really an egregious oversight of the medicinal power that is in cannabis, and it's legal in most places now. And I find you have a balance of ketamine, which is a conventional, well, let's just call it a pharmaceutical, and then cannabis, which is a potent plant medicine. How do you find? I'm curious if there are any differences, if you've noticed in using those two things, and where do you find the strengths of using cannabis lay with the work that you do?
I think ketamine is a very powerful. Obviously, it's a World Health Organization's been around for the longest time, for really long, back in the 40s and 50s as a anesthesic, and I think low dose off the shelf ketamine, very low dose, allows again that calming of the default mode network in a more spacious view that allows then to scale to allows people to ladder up or climb up and build skills to really go into the story and go into the traumatic memory. And I believe also in the work that it's a little bit more tricky with cannabis. Is not when I say it's more tricky, it's the dosing is more tricky because nowadays the dosing of cannabis, even commercial or recreational or medicinal, is very high, and it's also not full spectrum. And you don't get an entourage effect. So with the cannabis, the real opportunity is with tinctures, low dose tinctures, and to be able to use THC and CBD or CBG or CBN as a combination or alone by themselves, but very low dose so that what you're doing is the same thing. You are, calming the default mode network, and you're able to get into story and conversation that is much deeper and, is not as protective because, especially with people that have trauma, there is a real high degree of protectors, managers, or just don't want to go there, won't go there, but this allows a little bit more spaciousness. Ketamine, on the other side of it, I also find that working with one particular client I'm working with right now has a um, cannabis use disorder, is using cannabis too much flower, and is as a result of that, and there's no full spectrum and very adverse to that, but using ketamine, low dose ketamine, as a way to get off of the cannabis, to go ahead and provide that spaciousness and then go deep, is another alternative way to go ahead and deal with a substance use disorder rather than try to white knuckle it, which a lot of people do, but then they fall back into heavy use. So I find those two specifically here. Obviously, microdosing and doing mushrooms, or the other areas, you're out in Oregon, so you have a more legal framework out there. But those are also incredibly viable alternatives because they're doing exactly the same thing. But again, the difference being low dose versus heroic dosing. And heroic dosing, 5 milligrams or more, 10, if you want to go up to 20, if you get that's a real heroic dose. But the point being is that it depends on the work that you're doing versus the journey that you might want to take, which is much more spacious and much more visual than the opportunity to then go deep with a rational prefrontal cortex mind.
For those who heard default mode network and don't necessarily understand what that is, that's kind of our autopilot. So getting somebody to do really meaningful um, soul work and mental health work requires turning the autopilot off and getting beyond that wall, that network. So a couple of things. I work. I'm in Oregon today, but normally I'm in Washington State. And I'm in a decrim area with a lot of people who use almost exclusively plant-based medicine as opposed to like ketamine, who are really anti-ketamine, and I get that approach. I mean, I'm a naturopathic doctor. That's what we do. We do plants and fungi. Um, but I think it's important that the way our society is structured, there's a lot of people who will only be open to that sort of approach or that particular door. And I think it would be irresponsible to take it off the table if there's somebody that would respond really well to that type of therapy.
Yeah, I believe certainly in plant power, if you will. And yeah, I think ketamine is given a bad rap in some ways, specifically because of the horse tranquilizer and the K-hole and the disassociative quality. It's not really a psychedelic. It's disassociative. So within the context of individuals, I don't believe. I was doing work with a clinic over here locally, and basically they charge $800, $900 for 4 or 5 sessions. You go in, and they go into the K hole, and then trying to do kind of therapeutic work with someone who just came out of a totally disassociative state to help them to, piece part or activate, some of the things that might have happened is I found it almost impossible, because, it's like trying to interpret dreams. There's no real skill building or skill structuring there that really helps you to activate maybe another behavior that might change the story or might help you to reframe things. So the low dose ketamine, psycholytic dosing, I find very affordable. Working with a specific organization that provides very low dose for a month, and I can work with as a vet. I can work with other vets that can afford it, and they can go ahead and get out of their PTSD and their trauma, or at least move into a state of more association to who they are as a whole individual, rather than bifurcating or isolating themselves because of what happened or when it happened or who it happened with. So, that's one benefit. Unfortunately, we're not in Oregon or Washington, and we don't have it would be so nice to be there. You know, I'm for so many reasons. I've often been told I should be on the left coast rather than the right coast. So
One of the things that I've been able to manifest is working with a retreat center in Colorado. And so it is my intention, I've already been there a couple times, to continue going back as a co-facilitator for a large group of veterans and first responders and watching how they respond to high dose, heroic dose psilocybin, and then some other things like Kana and Kava, which are plant medicines, and seeing how they respond. And I think it's a very, it's been contentious, like getting these things legalized and medicalized and regulated.
Kana is wonderful.
Yeah.
Kana's quite a heart opener. It's so I was so surprised, and you can get it. I mean, it's available. It's not like it's illegal everywhere. So
Well, give America a chance, so make it illegal, for right now. And the funny thing is, to me, and I use kinda on a regular basis, it's not something that I really notice an effect from as much as I notice my nervous system is, let's just call it smoother. But, yeah, anyway, it's a very brave thing for Oregon, for the people of Oregon and Colorado to, sign off on these things, like through the beta testing, and I can see how things are gonna change from state to state. Washington, I'm read in a little bit on what's going on with the regulation and the passing of a couple. People are trying to pass a couple bills, and it's not going well so far. So it might be a while for Washington, and I can imagine places like, California hasn't been able to get it through, and New Mexico is trying, and there's a bunch of different places. But it would be nice to see these things start to be a little bit more accessible. But at the same time, folks realizing that these things are just tools, and that they're not the be all end all. And it's the other work, and uh, it's it's the homework that happens. Like, go home and make new habits, and learn how to regulate your own news system.
it's so hard, Kristen. It's so hard. I mean, it's trauma TV. You say, you don't turn on, I don't turn on. It's trauma TV. We're living in a traumatic society. Trauma is the default, between swiping left, swiping right. I mean, we're tied to our devices, and it's so hard to normalize and to get our nervous system to really just sort of be harmonious, and that, I understand the feeling of the kana. Believe me, it really does make you sort of like, oh, okay, the world's pretty good today. I feel it's like that first cup of coffee in the morning, like, okay, I'm ready to go, but more calmer. So it's it would be nice if we were able to just sort of normalize, everyone just sort of calm down and share a meal together. Wouldn't that be great?
That's just scandalous. What did you just say? Oh my gosh. I So we're getting close to time here. I I can only imagine that we could talk for another 45 minutes without a problem at all. Real quick, I didn't ask, are you still working with Heroic Hearts?
Yes, I am. I'm part of I'm a mental health healthcare ambassador with Heroic Hearts Project, and it's again, we're a little limited here in New York, but we take people offshore, either offshore or also out to Washington or Oregon. And that's I think good work, because vets need a alternative, and also using low dose ketamine as well, finding very good benefits for that. So that's really vets who have been in battle or dealing with PTSD or trauma in some way or another, and really helping them to normalize that and really get their lives back.
I think one of the best conversations that's come out of all of these conversations with veterans is the reality of and the understatement of moral injury, as opposed to folks that have gone in kicking down doors and brandishing rifles, is the fact that a lot of veterans haven't done that, but yet they've come away from post-traumatic stress because of the tension that is between their moral code and what they've seen happen in the world when they're out there, ostensibly representing a country that represents democracy and justice. So that can be a hard pill to swallow for a lot of folks.
Yeah, it's the old saying of, are you serving the eagle or are you serving the snake? And I think more people want to serve the eagle than the snake. So, it's just a question of, who your masters are. And unfortunately, some people, because of chain of command, get wrapped up into, bad policies and bad decisions. So.
All right. In closing, Keith, if you could give us an idea where people can find you, find your book, where they might find you on social media, that would be helpful.
The book is Return of the Exiled Child. So if they go in and just type into Google, you'll get a lot of prompts that come up. You can go to my website, exiledchild.com, or you can go to Amazon, and Amazon is, it's a pre-order on Amazon. It's a pre-order. It comes out March 15th, 2026. And it's my second book. The first book was The Mindfulness Experience, same name as the podcast you were on. That really talked about mindfulness. And the second book uses the mindfulness to go ahead and dig deep and help individuals work through their trauma. And it does that with story and practice and teaching and reflection. So I hope it helps touch some hearts and helps people, get their lives back to journey home.
Maybe I should say this at the beginning instead of the end. Hopefully, people have made it this far, but it goes without saying that, yeah, we're two veterans, and a lot of the guests I have are veterans, but this material is meant for anybody. So, if you liked this episode, please hit the like button, share, subscribe. I think share is the most important part because that's how the word gets out. Please share this episode with somebody who needs to hear it. And if you're in Washington State and you need medical care, you can find me at meridianpassagewellness.com. And you can find me on all the social medias. I have pages for Alternative Flight Plan on LinkedIn and Facebook, Meridian Passage on Facebook, and then I'm on Instagram as Dr. Kristen Barnes. All right, that wraps up today's episode. We're going to bring it back into the pattern and come back for an OK3 wire, and maybe we'll have a Barney Clark at Rats. For those of you who know, if you know, you know. And we appreciate you listening in on the episode. Thanks very much, and we'll see you on the next pass of the Alternative Flight Plan podcast.